deception proof. And like we say, one of our sons is drug proof. He would never, he's the kind of kid that they can't get to take drugs. Well, we want to become deception proof and thriving. Deception proof and thriving spiritually. And Ken was talking before the podcast, and he was speculating that this is like the first dry run of a new world order that intends to get people used to blind obedience and believing things that your common sense says, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. Kind of like the dystopian 1984 following false deceptions. And if this is like the first wave, the first trial run, the later runs are going to get stronger and stronger. And eventually, of course, we'll get to the beast and the world worshiping a man and all the things that the book of Revelation predicts and Daniel predict. But for instance, let's take things that don't make common sense. Kindergartners wearing masks. You know anything about kids, you know they have runny noses. I could get more graphic. Other things, their mask is going to become a petri dish of germs. You just think about little kids in masks. You know what a disaster that's going to be. And Ron DeSantis, Florida, said they actually checked in the districts that had tight mask mandates, the kids had more sickness than the ones that didn't have masks, which makes sense. That's just not common sense. And you know the virus is sub-cell level. It's so small, a regular cloth mask won't hold it. Just shoots right. And people actually know that scientifically, but they still are caught up in the mask mandate. It's like, it's because most of the world's getting caught up in it. You can sign. It's kind. I see this as a spiritual thing. Also, lockdowns. What do lockdowns achieve? Actually, because the virus gets in the air, it's going to be out there. It's going to get you. I mean, if you're vulnerable, probably sooner or later. All lockdowns did was destroy businesses, especially small businesses. Like the big government favors big businesses, but all the small businesses die on the vine, and it gives them more control. Actually, fascism is kind of socialism working with big companies. And like Hitler and Mussolini worked on some with the big arms manufacturers in Germany. But you get the general idea. But it doesn't work. But they're doing it in Australia, and they're using the Australian army to lock down the population. I actually saw some video. Unbelievable. And if you see something extreme overseas, you think, well, that'll never come to America. Don't be so sure of that. They want you to obey whether it makes sense or not. Jawohl. But you get the general idea. I have an antidote for this, but I'm going to reveal the antidote toward the end of the sermon. And not that it's all that surprising, but maybe it'll create a little drama for those who see the video for the first time. But step one to avoiding being deceived and thriving spiritually is to be a knowledge worker. And I mean a knowledge worker regarding the Bible and the basic truths of human behavior. Because that's what the Bible is. And all the things the Bible says not to do, as people do it, have repercussions. For instance, the Bible says sex should be confined to marriage. And as the world has undermined marriage, all kinds of stuff, sexual revolution, society is having more and more problems. I'm not saying I have the answer to all the problems, but if that one thing alone, for the most part, could be kept. I know there are problems, but if that were the general thing, we'd have so fewer problems in society, you wouldn't believe it. Bad teenage boys, I can elaborate, but you get the general idea. Ephesians 4:13, Paul writes, till he's speaking about gaining spiritual maturity, till we all come to the unity of faith, the knowledge of the Son of God, to a perfect man, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. That means spiritual maturity. That we should no longer be children, tossed to and fro and carried about by every wind of doctrine. In other words, some guy comes along with a clever argument here, he gets you. Another one comes along with a clever argument on the other side, he gets you. Tossed back and forth. And you'll see that politically too. We should be grounded in Bible truth, so we're not so easily swayed. Carried about by every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of men. When it comes to arguments, people are very clever. You know, watch a debate tournament. They can switch sides and they can make either side seem very right. Cunning, craftiness, and deceitful plotting. 2 Timothy 2:15. 2 Timothy 2:15. Be diligent, present yourself approved to God, a worker. You know, just like if you were an electrician or a plumber, or you did drywall construction, a carpenter, you know, you should be knowledgeable about all that stuff they need to know to do it. Well, he's saying we should become like workers as far as understanding the Bible, who does not need to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. Now, you know how to understand it, put it in proper context. A lot of people take a Bible scripture out of context, they don't understand, and they misunderstand it. So God says be a worker who knows the Bible. But the world says the exact opposite. Let me give you an example. I have reading problems because of some eye problems I'm getting into. So I was at Pam's house, and I was shocked to find on her, not shocked, but happy to find on her bookcase an NIV giant letter. I couldn't even find that online, Bible, you know, big giant letters. I was so glad to find that. You know, I tried to read it during that whole weekend, but there was so many relatives and stuff, I didn't get much done, but that's another story. But for various and sundry reasons, our suitcase, we couldn't get it in there, so I just carried it. We got to O'Hare Airport, and we had to spend an extra night at O'Hare because of they canceled a lot of flights, bad weather, and I couldn't sleep the night, so I'm tired and a little frazzled already. And our basket goes through with Natalie's purse, my hat, and the Bible. And it gets shunted in a special line. So I asked the guy, well, where is our thing? He said, and my wallet's in there too. He said, oh, it's in a special line. You got to go talk to the TSO officer. So he looks at it. I thought he was going to inspect Natalie's purse. Maybe she has some hair solution. This happened to her 7, 8 years ago. It has more than 2 ounces, like it could be a liquid bomb. Like Natalie's going to hijack an airplane. But that's how, and they've thrown some of her stuff that's hard to get away. No, that wasn't it. She even had a nail file. I think they once threw a nail file of her away too. Like she's going to hijack an airplane with a nail file. I'm not making this up. That's what I expected. No, he didn't look at her purse. He pulled up the Bible, shook it, opened it up, leafed through the pages, shook it again. It was the Bible that concerned him. Our government is telling our legal, because they're like airport police, that people with Bibles are dangerous. I'm not making that up. Yvonne Brighton told us about a decade ago, whenever she goes to the Canadian border and she has Bibles in her luggage, they hassle her about having a Bible. We said, well, that'll never happen in America. Now it's happening in America. The reason I'm mentioning that, if you were to go back in American history, and really not all that many years, the Bible was revered in America. Well, you probably, if you read the Pilgrim's Compact and other things, it was all full of Bible. Well, I won't go into all American history, but just check American history. The Bible used to have even the Bible on the frontier. There's some books written about that. And, the Bible was revered in America, in American history. Now, our government authorities are telling certain police it's a sign of a potential terrorist. That's how far we have slipped. And maybe with my bald head, I might look dangerous, but Natalie certainly doesn't look dangerous. But at my age, I'm going to be hijacking any airplanes, taking over the country by force. Give me a break. But now, it wasn't too bad, the talking he gave us, so we survived it. I don't know if I'm going on a potential list of people to keep an eye on. But that's how it's, you better hide your Bible when you travel and hope they don't search it out and see. You think I'm laughing, don't you? That's how far truth has fallen in America. And it's a global thing. It's like there's a global fear that's being pushed by the global media to justify Orwellian deception. If you read 1984 and some of those other similar books, the Department of Peace was really the Department of War. The Department of Truth was really the Department of Lies and Propaganda. And he goes through a whole list of those. Totally Orwellian deception. Well, that's what we're getting. We're getting bills in Congress. Whatever their label, they're 90% the opposite of that. They've been doing that for several years, but it's worse now. And we can talk details later. But they're deceiving the public, and the media, of course, is buying it. They're backing up every lie. I'll put it like this. The CDC blasted Florida. Turned out they inflated the statistics substantially. Now, was that a lie or was it an accident? I'll let you decide that. But it's gotten to the point where you can't trust certain government agencies, and you certainly can't trust our media. I would say you can't even trust much of academia as far as research honesty. Maybe there's some play there, but you can play with statistics and make anything sound any way you want. Actually, I had a book at one time called Statisticians and Other Liars. You can lie with stats. It depends on how you play the base you use, and it's just, people are very clever. So when you read some stat that shows, the world is ending. Anyway, the people that don't want to follow all the government stuff, they're killing us all. Before you panic and run out the door screaming, just realize you can't trust the stats. It's probably not as bad. They're intentionally scaring us, my opinion. They probably know it. Now, maybe a lot of the lower level media people, don't they believe what they're told? Maybe. So what we need is, since the government's going astray, we want to give you something from biblical history. In biblical history, there's a leader in Israel whose government actions and lies undermine the northern 10 tribes, which is known as Israel. When you read the Bible, you have Israel and Judah. Israel is the northern 10, Judah is the southern 3. Basically, that's it. Because of Joseph, they split into 13 tribes. Joseph got 2 tribes. That's how it, I know 13 tribes kind of confuses you, but that's how it actually is. So that the northern 10 went into captivity because of what Jeroboam did. God actually told Jeroboam that he would give him, because of Solomon's sins, he would give him the northern 10, and his dynasty would be as strong, and God would take care of it, just like David's dynasty, if he behaved himself. And you'll see it all in the scripture. I'm not going to read them all, but I'm going to read a little bit, 1 Kings 12. But Jeroboam gave into his base fears. I think his advisors probably feared it too, because these men are, even though they were in Israel, they're still carnal men that didn't really believe in God. You got to remember that. Even though God was around and God's real prophets were around, they didn't really believe in God. Their faith wasn't what it should be. Although they could have done better, that's for sure. 1 Kings 12:26. So his advisors probably helped feed his fears. And Jeroboam said in his heart, "Now the kingdom may return to the house of David. If these people go up to offer sacrifices in the house of Jehovah at Jerusalem, then the heart of the people will turn back to their Lord." In other words, he really thought Rehoboam, who's in the line of David, is really their real king, not me. And they're going to realize that when they go up to the Feast of Tabernacles. And most of the people They didn't go to everything, but they almost all went to the Feast of Tabernacles. When they go to the feast, they're going to want him back. And Rehoboam, king of Judah. And they will kill me and go back to the king of Judah, Rehoboam. Now, he really had no reason for those fears because God actually told him that he wasn't going to take the kingdom away from him, Solomon, because of David. He loved David so much he wasn't going to take it away from David's son. But as soon as Solomon died, he would get 10 kings. And it all worked out perfectly. Rehoboam did stupid things, and so Jeroboam saw God's prophecy fulfilled. He was king of the northern 10. But he still gave in to his base fears and said, I want to make sure it stays this way, and I will pervert the religion. I'll make a counterfeit religion. In other words, he trusted cleverness and scheming and politics over faith in God. Verse 28, this is 2 Kings 12, 28. Therefore the king asked advice. His advisors were probably even more carnal than he was, is my opinion. So they probably, oh yeah, do it. He made 2 calves of gold. They probably were solid wood carved, and then they coat them with gold plating. But it's still a beautiful thing. You know, it sparkles, it's gold, it's on a big pedestal. And said to the people, and so young bulls, by the way, were a major thing in the pagan world. I don't know why. They worship powerful animals, sort of like some Native American tribes worship bears. Because, you know, in the forest, the bear is the apex predator. And bulls are all over the world, and some varieties of bulls are really powerful, big horns. You see them in the rodeos. So it fit paganism. He says to the people, it's too much for you to go all the way to Jerusalem. He's going to give you 2 convenient locations up north. Here are your gods, O Israel, which brought you out of the land of Egypt. In other words, God looks like these young bulls. It's the one that brought you out of Egypt. Now you realize that if you know anything about history, when they tried that with the golden calf, when Moses was on the mountain, God was quite upset. And Moses had him grind that thing into powder and the people drink it to prove how upset he was with it. But Jeroboam did it anyway, out of his fear. He felt insecure. Sometimes when people are insecure, they compensate by schemes. They say, well, I don't know if I can trust God, but I can trust schemes. I can trust myself. I can trust things like my cleverness or money or my political connections. And I'm not saying anything wrong with saving money or being clever or having political friends that might help you someday, but really your trust, our trust must be in God primarily. Things like political connections, they can be gone just like that. Money, just like that. You know, you could have a 1929. Oh, maybe the best example is Germany. A lot of Germans have big savings, the Weimar Republic and all the bad things they did. All of a sudden their currency was worth nothing. Nothing, just like that. It would take a wheelbarrow full of the marks to buy a few loaves of bread. Actually, we have I think it's $100,000 bill from Venezuela. You got it at home. I'm going to show it to the grandkids. Give them a lesson in the danger of inflation, because they're not getting this in public school. That thing is worth about, I think you couldn't even buy a couple rolls of toilet paper in an American store with what that thing is worth now. Venezuela currency. Anyway, and there's some other countries that have had Zimbabwe. Some others have had that horrible experience. Already, because of the overspending, already inflation's going, about 10%. And they keep saying, well, it'll end soon, it will end soon. If they keep spending like that, the laws of economics, which you cannot defy, people think you could defy it, it's like the laws of human behavior in the Bible. If they keep doing that, I don't see how inflation can stop. Now they may get a break or two on certain products and brag about it, but you wait and see. My point is, you can't trust money. And even your own cleverness. You might be healthy as a horse today, but who knows what tomorrow might bring. So the only thing we can really trust is God. And that's the bridge you don't want to burn. And that's what he did. He burned the bridge back to God. And the northern 10 never repented. If you compare the list of kings, God always gives you the value of the kings, Judah and the northern tribe of Israel. The northern 10, Israel's kings are bad, bad, worse, bad, bad, worse ever, bad, the most worst ever. Judah had bad kings, good kings, bad kings, good kings, bad kings, really, really good king like Josiah. And obviously they did much better. But they kept the holy days. What he did was, he told them, don't go to the Feast of Tabernacles. Stay up here in the north and worship the golden calves. Because he was fearful they'd go back to the line of David. He was so wrong. Now, he got a prophet, and the prophet told him about the altar would go bad and that his dynasty would end in destruction and all that, which did happen. So it didn't really work for him. But as far as we can tell, he never repented. It's like, now that I've made this big commitment, I can't go back and tell people I was wrong. So as far as we know, he never repented, even though he knew better. We give an example. I didn't put the scripture in there, but if you read the rest of that section, in chapter 14, his beloved older son is deadly sick. Does he go to the false prophets that he's put in a counterfeit religion for advice? He knows they don't know anything. He goes down to Judah. Well, he sends his wife down to Judah secretly to talk to a real prophet of God to get the real goods. Now, his people are given the false stuff that he knows is false. You see the hypocrisy in that? We give the people the false stuff, but when crunch time comes, I'm going to the real people who are really in touch with God. But as far as we know, he never repented. They never learned to trust the God. They trusted worldly things. Now, I'm going to tell this joke, and for those who see this on my local audience, they agree with me. They're not going to mind this joke. But for those of you that mind this political joke, feel free to find out. My email address is out there somewhere, and you can email me and give me your thoughts on a political joke, and I will read it and consider it. This is called Communist Democrat. Okay. A Republican in a wheelchair entered a restaurant one afternoon in the future, and he asked the waitress for a cup of coffee. The Republican looked across the restaurant and asked, hey, is that the prophet from God that's doing miraculous things? Is that him sitting on the other side? The waitress says, yes, that's him. The Republican said, well, send him a cup of coffee free from me. Just tell him thank you for what he's doing. And she did it. The next patron walked in was a libertarian who had a hunchback, really hunchback, spinal disease. And she also asked the waitress about the prophet of God who's done wonderful teachings and great healings. And he said, yeah, that's him, the waitress said. She said, well, just privately send him a nice cup of herbal, healthy tea. You don't even have to tell him I sent it to him. Just tell him we admire the good work the prophet is doing. So a third patron came to the restaurant. He was a calm dim, on crutches. He was on crutches. He hobbled to the booth, sat down, and hollered real loud, hey there, honey, how about getting me a cold mug of Miller High Light? Maybe he's one of those Texas Democrats that ran off from Texas with their cases of Miller High Light. Anyway, and he, and so he asked about the prophet as well. And yeah, that's the prophet. He said, so that's one of God's boys, huh? And the waitress says, yes, that's him. And so he loudly proclaimed to everybody in the restaurant, real loud, I'm going to buy him a Miller High Light on me. And he chuckled. So When the prophet got up to leave, he passed by the Republican, said, "Thank you for your kindness," touched him, and healed him. All of a sudden, he bounced out of the wheelchair. He was walking. He walks to the Libertarian, touches her, thanks her, and all of a sudden, she straightens up. He walks over to the calm dim and gets ready to touch him, and he says, "Don't touch me. I'm on government disability." By the way, he jumped out of his, I forgot to mention, he jumped out of the place where he was sitting, his booth. He jumped out and said, "Don't touch me, I'm on disability." Now, the point of that joke is, maybe it's a bad joke, but the point of that joke is, there are people who are being told right now that being on government free money, now nothing's really free, but I won't go into that later. You know, we get to go college free. They're going to give them daycare free, at least early daycare, I think, like Head Start when they're 3, 4, and 5 till they go to kindergarten. So you're going to get daycare free and the first 2 years of college free. Actually, as I said, nothing's free, but they're telling them that. They've changed originally they had, if you're a taxpayer, you could get certain tax credits for children. Well, they've changed that, where you don't actually have to pay any taxes to get the credit, and they send it to you every month, regardless. It's actually become a form of welfare payment. They're also sending extra money to people that are unemployed, beyond even the regular unemployment, which they've increased as well, to the point that a lot of workers say, "Why should I bother to go to work? I'm making more money, or almost as much money, sitting at home without being hassled by my horrible supervisor on the job." And almost every, especially small businesses, are struggling to keep workers. Now, the lie is that being on government welfare is a blessing and it's good for you. By the way, I'm not against being on welfare if you need it, if you're really disabled, or for maybe a year or two you're between jobs, you have some crisis. So I'm not against people getting help. But can you see what they want to do, and they're starting to do it, is they're buying votes. That's my opinion. They're buying votes. You get a large chunk of the population, the lower classes, on free money. They all think that's a blessing and a gift. It's a curse. Literally, you talk to people who've been on, or they know people, usually it's women, on welfare several generations. It undermines their character, undermines their health. It really is, it undermines your pride, because you get a normal, even if it's a bad job. And I'm not saying I was a great worker in bad jobs. I probably resented some of the bad jobs I had as a teenager and a young man. But you do get a certain something out of doing even a bad job, right? Even a dirty job in a foundry or in a fish market. I worked at a fish market scaling fish. But there's a certain something you get out of contributing. All that is taken away from you. And it's bad for people. But the media and the government will make you think they're doing you a favor. They're not doing you a favor. Let me give you the best historical example. It's called the Rabble of Rome. As the Roman Empire got bigger and richer and more whatever, different ones, because the Roman people in Rome could vote for consul and other political jobs as you moved your way up to the top of the Roman Empire, as it became a republic, they bought votes. Actually, you had to have rich supporters to pay your campaign. They paid for games in the circus, the big arena, and the rich candidates would give the poor people one of the biggest shows where they killed wild animals and killed people and all kinds of things, horse races and chariot races and human races and a lot of violence too. And where at the end the gladiator could decide whether to kill the victim or not, and the crowd all is thumbs down, kill him, thumbs up, spare him. You've probably seen some of those movies. And they all got free wine and bread. and they became the rabble of Rome, we might call the inner city. Totally spoiled, didn't have to work. They got free entertainment, and they got free food. And I guess if they had an apartment, it was free for them. Well, what happened was those people became so, unlike the Roman Empire in the earlier centuries, those people of Rome became so weak, they couldn't be in the legions. They couldn't be trusted as workers because they were just out of shape, weak, and undisciplined. And the Roman Empire had to have almost all their legions made up of foreigners. We might call them mercenaries. And that did work for a while. Can you see the danger of having your empire guarded? Now, they did say if you stay in the legion so many years you're successful, you get citizenship. So there was some. But can you still see the danger of having your empire guarded by foreigners? And eventually that was, well, the rabble of Rome and them not being able to be soldiers. And I'll bet you if they were to bring the draft back, not that the draft worked so well in the days of Vietnam, but I'll bet you money, if they were to bring the draft back, a large chunk of young people in the inner city couldn't get in the Army. They couldn't pass the physical, they couldn't pass the, not that the Army IQ test is all that big, it's just for basic high school stuff. They couldn't pass the IQ test, and they couldn't pass the drug test. I've heard stories from recruiters that a fair number of young men signed for the Army. After 1 month of basic training, either they're kicked out or they quit. I can't take it. And by the way, the basic training, unless you're in the Marines, with the exception, is not as tough as it used to be. And they can't take it. I would guarantee you they'd have to wash out a high percentage. Now, maybe here in flyover country, we're not quite as spoiled yet. We might do all right. But I'll bet you in big cities like New York, Chicago, LA, San Francisco, maybe a few others that I better not mention, that would be the case. In other words, free food, free entertainment. I think they're going to give free Wi-Fi. At least in the past, they've given free cell phones to people as well. It's not good for people. And by the way, nothing's free. You're going to pay for it. It'll be indirectly paid for it, but nothing is free. And you think free college is free? Actually, it's just going to make college less meaningful. It's a place to brainwash kids and less valuable. I guarantee that too. Nothing is really free. So this permanent welfare is a big lie, and I think the Dems know what they're doing. Will they get a large population hooked and bring in maybe another lower class with the open border who want to get on all the goodies? Probably. Will they be able to buy enough votes to stay in power? I guess time will tell. But can you see that's going to lead to the demise of the country? Just like the Northern 10 fell, they went into captivity and God wasn't happy with them and all that. Just like the Roman Empire fell, it's bad. Not working is a curse. Rome learned the hard way. And there are a lot of books written about the fall of the Roman Empire. Jeroboam gave Israel 2 curses. And I want to read 1 Kings 12:29. 1 Kings 12:29. And he set up one of the golden calves in Bethel and the other in Dan. Now this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship. In other words, I want you to have the easy thing. Going all the way to Jerusalem for the feast is too hard. I'm going to give it to you local, so you don't have to put out any effort. If you don't have to put out any effort, it's something as valuable. It isn't. But make it easy for people. Stay at home. Jeroboam ordained a feast on the 15th day of the 8th month. In other words, he changed it in the month which he had devised in his own heart. In other words, he made it up. It was not biblical, based on nothing. He just made it up, he and his advisors. You realize that even if you have political power, now you can make a day people get off work, but you cannot make a day holy. No political power, no ecclesiastical power except for ordained by God. Only God can make something holy. He ordained a feast for the children of Israel. In those days, they did not have books. you all know the printing didn't exist. We think most people didn't even read, but they had very good memories, had to memorize stuff. They had scrolls, but they were expensive and hard to get, and they were limited in number. So the people lost an 8-day festival in Jerusalem. Would be 8 days of real Bible learning from people, priests who really did know the Bible. And it was a picnic, so they enjoyed it. It was fun, and 8 days of intensive Bible reading and explanation. Taking the feast away was robbing the people of something that would have made them spiritually stronger and could resist deception. They lost the truth that would have helped them stay closer to God, and staying closer to God is always good for a nation. The way to repent was blocked. But he also gave them a second curse. The second curse Jeroboam gave them, I'll read it in 1 Kings 12:31. I'll read it, 1 Kings 12:31. He made a house of high places, go on the top of hills to worship. And the pagans did that with trees and stuff, and made priests of the lowest of the people, which were not the sons of Levi. In other words, he fired the Levites, whose job was to teach Bible principles. They also were judges, and they did health inspections and that kind of thing. He got rid of them. They all, we believe, moved to the south, moved to Judah. He got rid of the Levites. Why did he do that? Because they knew too much that was true. It's like if you're a lawyer and you know your client is guilty, the last thing you want is a juror who thinks for himself and who knows too much. You want, and they do that. They interview the jurors, and you want people that are pliable, malleable, that'll believe if you're clever, believe anything I tell them. You're going to get rid of anybody who knows too much about whatever you think you don't want them to know too much about. So he got rid of the Levites, and he picked people who would, in my opinion, teach anything for the money. Yeah, tell me, King Jeroboam, what do you want me to teach? We'll tell you. I'm high priest now. We'll give you instructions. And, yes, sir, that's what we'll preach. They didn't know anything anyway. By the way, if you look at the first and second commandments, it's illegal to have carved idols. People like having something physical to look at, like a statue of what they consider a saint or all kinds of things. People like something to hold in their hand, wear around their neck, that they think is a connection to God. But God is spiritual. We have to worship him in spirit and truth. And no physical artwork, no matter how beautiful it is, Michelangelo or anybody, can capture God. You just have to know that and avoid that kind of idolatry. And the golden bull is anathema to God. Well, people cannot thrive without knowledge. So they didn't have the Levitical priesthood. At least most of the time, they were supposed to know the rules about God had the main worship done in Jerusalem for quality control purposes. That's where the best trained priests were. And you get out in the countryside, more loosey-goosey stuff can happen. But at least the Levites were supposed to have knowledge. You get rid of the teachers, you're getting rid of the Bible. Because in a sense, the Levites were the Bible for the average person. There were no books around. Scrolls were, maybe a few Levites here and there might have the 5 scrolls of the Moses' writings, but it wouldn't be available for most people. Now, of course, you can get a Bible anywhere and read it, but it was the priests were the Bible. They would tell you what the law said about mildew and all kinds of things. There are all kinds of laws, and there are health laws and marriage rules and all kinds of things. Well, without the teachers, and you put false teachers in there, the people are vulnerable to every kind of lie. Can you get the feel that that's where America's headed? And many churches, I hear people on AFR complain about churches that are accepting CRT. And one excuse, this is a major denomination, used to be considered conservative. They're saying, well, we don't actually put it in our doctrines, but it's a tool that pastors can use. What? That's pure racism and communism. And by the way, it was invented by a communist in Europe because they were losing the worker owner argument wasn't working for them. They're looking for new things, and that's one of their new things to divide people by, so they can gain control. But churches are being sucked into that, and it's hard to find places where there's a lot of truth. And I'm thinking it's going to get harder and harder. There's even a prophecy that says there'll be a famine of truth near the end. We can argue about what that means, but at least one thing I think it means, there's going to be less and less truth available. And you certainly can't trust the media and academia, can you? By now, we know them pretty well. I remember guys saying, we got all the evidence that Trump was a Russian agent. I think, what? That doesn't even make sense. Why would a billionaire like Trump want to be a stooge for Putin instead of president of the United States? It doesn't even make logical sense. They couldn't bribe him. He doesn't need their money. He actually lost money running for president. But they had proof. Now, obviously, after 2.5 years and $35 million of investigation, yeah, well, there is no proof. But the media preached that for 2.5 years, and many people believed it, and still believe it. So just remember, that's the media. You can't trust them. They didn't have any evidence. Believe me, if they had it, they would have brought it out and used it. They had rumors, but that's nothing but, I can spread a rumor, you can spread a rumor. People need good teachers. His new priests were like hired guns. They would teach anything Jeroboam wanted. The key to not being deceived is knowing the Bible well. And one way to know the Bible well is to go to the Feast of Tabernacles, get 8 days of teaching and a lot of fun, and also come to church every week, because this is a feast too, the Sabbath, and we all can kind of learn together. And people might think, well, I'm pretty solid. I know the Bible well. I don't need to learn anymore. That's the kind of attitude that'll get you in trouble. Like a coach tells a team, oh, we're pretty good. We don't have to worry about that team. We're much better than they are. Coaches say, when you get too confident in yourself, that's when you have a big fall. Anybody can be deceived. Human nature is tricky. We need all the learning, all the encouragement we can possibly get. So come to the feast. Come to the weekly Sabbath. Keep the faith. Keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Keep the weekly Sabbath. Learn together. And if we do that, we will thrive in a world full of lies.